2020 has been a shitter. I think we can all agree. And while I'm not as optimistic about 2021 being so much better as the WWE seem to think it'll be, I'm hopeful things will at least be moving in the right direction. One thing that has been pretty great this year though is the games. And boy, have we had some time to play games this past year. In this episode of Mellow Gaming Recommends, I'm taking a relaxed look at 5 of my favourite games of the year, and I'll sneak in a few honourable mentions too. So, why waste time? Let's cue up a flashy countdown graphic. Streets of Rage 4 released onto the world on April 30th, 2020 on basically everything. Developed by .emu, Lizard Cube and Guard Crush Games, it was the return of the classic brawler series fans had wanted to see happen for over 25 years, and boy did they bring it back. Some people had concerns about the art style when trailers first launched, but I kinda loved it all along. It's animated so smoothly and the attacks have a chunky impact a good belt scrolling brawler should have. The soundtrack is more techno brilliance from a trio of great composers in the form of Olivier Derivé, Motohiro Kawashima and the legendary Yuzo Koshiro. It wouldn't be a Streets of Rage without the sort of thumping soundtrack made famous by the first 2 games on the Mega Drive. You can even choose a retro soundtrack if you fancy listening to those very tunes. In co-op the game's a blast and I highly recommend getting a buddy around to beat down some thugs. When we're allowed to, again that is. Luckily the game has online multiplayer for you and your socially distanced pals to rage all over them streets together. If I had any gripes, it'd be that the solo player is a little too tough for the normal level, feeling as though it's geared to multiplayer a lot more than single. Paul and I both struggled solo, but in co-op we beat it first time. So yeah, Streets of Rage 4 was a triumphant return of the classic series and one of the best examples of the genre there's been. It's available through Game Pass too, so if you have that, you've got no excuse for not giving the game a go. I covered Murder by Numbers in the free Rad Games episode of Mellow Gaming Recommends I released back in July. Feel free to check that out if you haven't. Murder by Numbers was released in March on PC and Switch, and is a combination of visual novel, Phoenix Wright style crime investigations and Picross. It's a mix of genres that only makes 2/3 of a sense at first, but once you see how the puzzle solving is worked into the investigations, the game just clicks. The story is presented episodically as we follow an actress named Honor Mizrahi, known for playing a detective on TV, as she sets out to solve a series of murders starting with that of her show's producer. The game is filled with wit, charm and goofy humour, and a super welcoming atmosphere that shouldn't stop anyone from being able to get fully invested. I made sure not to forget about this game for my end of year list, which often happens with anything released in the early part of the year. There's a tendency to drift towards the massive budget AAA games for end of year lists, usually because they tend to offer the biggest and flashiest experience, but I feel it's worth remembering those smaller games that are just as fun to play and not overly bloated with features and functions. Sometimes it's nice to just play a game, have a good time and finish it. Murder by Numbers is a fantastic example of a game that does just that for me, but also it's stuck in my mind all year due to its unique premise and fantastic story. So yeah, give Murder by Numbers a go. It's good, innit? Now Hades is a game that wasn't even on my radar until a few weeks before it exited early access in September. I had only vaguely heard of it, but had no idea what the game was until people started talking it up before its full release. I had no idea it was from Supergiant Games, the makers of the fantastic games Bastion, Transistor and Pyre. I didn't even know it was a roguelike, a genre I've been quite invested in over the years. When I knew all that and I started seeing actual gameplay, I had to do the rare thing and actually buy a game on Steam outside of the sales. I know, it sounds very unlike me. Anyway, I got Hades and loved every minute of it. I've not been able to complete a run yet because my hands are obviously terrible and I suck at games. Also, the next game on the list has kinda taken up all my time the last month or so. That said, every run I make I feel like I'm making genuine progress and getting a little better every time. There's a lot of little things you'll gain on each run to give you a sense of progression. A feeling that you're not just bashing your head up against the same luck-based wall of death like so many roguelikes feel they do. Weaponry is worth mentioning too. I don't think I've ever played a game that offers a variety of weapons that all feel good to use and genuinely viable for any run. If I had one I'd rarely use, it's the spear, but I'll still pick that up from time to time. I don't even stick with one weapon for multiple runs in a row, because just switching them up is part of the fun. Add to that the beautiful art style, understated and unique voice acting, and some incredible music, and you've got a game that's just dripping with style. It almost makes you want to go to hell just to hang with Zagreus and his pals. The dialogue is constantly pushing the game's story too. It's rare for a roguelike to have this much story as it does. It's more akin to the storytelling of a huge sprawling RPG than what you'd expect from a game like this. Hades is a game that will be regarded as an all-time great, and I already regard it as Supergiant's masterpiece. The chances of a Yakuza game appearing on my top 5 games of the year is always pretty much a guarantee. The series has been on an incredible run over the last generation that has seen it go from a loved series of cult games to a genuine blockbuster that sells in massive quantities. And for the developers Ryoga Kotoku Studios to then finish off the Kazuma Kiryu saga in Yakuza 6: A Song of Life and follow up with not only a new lead but an entirely new gameplay system is pretty daring for a franchise that has only found its feet over the last few years. Yakuza Like a Dragon, you see, is a fully turn-based RPG in the style of Dragon Quest and the like. The series' new protagonist, the instantly lovable Ichiban Kasuga, is very much not just a fan of Dragon Quest, but even sees himself as a fantasy hero from the classic games when in battle. He even sees himself and his friends making their moves in a turn-based format just like in the RPGs he admires. Somehow this isn't a jarring change for the series, and it fits right in almost as if it had always been there. They even worked in some of the Yakuza style elements to the combat, such as interacting with objects laying around the street to use as weapons. A few chapters into the game and you'll have a full party of various colourful characters who can all take on RPG style jobs to affect what skills they'll have at their disposal in combat. Jobs you change by literally going to the job centre. The game takes you through 3 locations, with the familiar Kamurocho bookending the game's 20-year spanning story, with its appearance changing each time you head back. If I had one issue of Yakuza 7, it's one of the few that people have voiced and I agree with. The last few chapters have some huge, very frustrating difficulty spikes. My advice, aim to be level 50 for chapter 14 at the least, and maybe a little higher. Game gets tough. That said, the rest of the game has been a pure joy. Ichiban is an instant all-time favourite protagonist for me. His endless optimism and empathy for others shines through the whole time you play, and he's the kind-hearted role model the world needs these days. If you've never played a Yakuza game, this is a great stepping in point. I do have plans to cover the entire franchise in one massive video one day. I've set it as a Patreon stretch goal though, as it would be a mammoth undertaking. If you'd like to see that happen, give the Patreon a look and it'll nudge me a little closer to what will likely be a movie-length episode. Before we get to the number 1 spot, I'd like to chuck in a few honourable mentions for other games I've been playing this year that deserve a bit of a shout out. There's the remake of Xenoblade Chronicles on Switch, a top quality RPG that many people missed when it first appeared on the Wii, and likely more people missed when it was one of the few games that required the new 3DS to play. This Switch version is the most readily available version of the game, and it's a fantastic way to lose many hours. Part-Time UFO is a neat little Switch and mobile game about stacking things up in order to earn a wage. You play as a little UFO that grabs them like those UFO catcher games you see in Japan. In multiplayer, the game is quite chaotic and primed for some good old-fashioned bickering. 2020 saw the return of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series to its former glory, something achieved by just remaking the originals again. But good this time. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 is a perfect example of how to do a remake. It feels super familiar to jump right back into, almost feeling like it's unlocking some hidden muscle memory from 20 years ago. It's a fully stacked package too, with all the levels of the original games, plus the course creator and online multiplayer. The addition of Revert, originally not introduced to the series until the 3rd entry, really helps tie this together as the best Tony Hawk's game ever made. Lastly, there's Lair of the Clockwork God, a genius combination of point-and-click adventure and platforming. You play as Dan and Ben from the games Ben There, Dan That and Time Gentlemen Please. This time Dan is obsessed with becoming a platforming star just like all the other indie platforming darlings, while Ben is sticking to his point-and-click roots. Unfortunately, all the apocalypses are happening and it's up to you and this dysfunctional pair to save the world by helping a supercomputer find out about human emotions. The game goes to some bizarre places and will make you chuckle, not just through its dialogue, but also with how clever some of its puzzles are. As mentioned at the top of the video, 2020 has been a shitter. For many of us, we faced going into lockdown mode at the end of March, and I feel as if, for many of us, the bleakness of having to stay in as much as possible was helped when, just a few days before, Nintendo released the latest Animal Crossing game to the world. You could see through social media how many people were coming together to share their islands, visit their friends through the game, and also just have a nice tranquil time, feeling as if they were being a little productive. I think any end of year list that doesn't at least include Animal Crossing New Horizons has either come from one of the handful of people that didn't get it for their Switch, or they've somehow been oblivious to what this year was like for many. This game managed to make isolation feel a little less lonely for millions of people, and that's a huge deal. It was a genuine cultural touchstone for a few months, with celebrities getting in on the act, talk shows being hosted through the game, and people sharing their creations for the world to see. Personally, I haven't missed a day of the game since it came out, and I fully intend to complete a full year without breaking that streak too. The frequent updates have helped keep elements of the game feeling fresh, and made my daily chores gain a little variety here and there. Although, Nintendo, where's Brewster's coffee bar? I need coffee. If you haven't jumped into Animal Crossing New Horizons yet, don't be put off by that feeling of being behind you may have from seeing other people's islands all flourishing. The community is full of people that love to help you get the supplies you need, and in a few days you'll be well on your way to having an island that's your own little paradise, away from the misery that has been this year. It's no secret how much of an Animal Crossing fan I am. My second most viewed video is me revisiting my GameCube village 10 years later, and I even made a recommends episode about the original game last year. This has been the first Animal Crossing game since the original that has held my daily interest, and while that could be just because of all the many lockdowns I have now been on, it's also because it's a genuinely great game in its own right. So that's it for my top 5. If I didn't mention your favourite game of the year, it's probably because I didn't play it, or it's rubbish and I hate it. A big thank you to all of you for supporting Mellow Gaming this year. The channel gained about 130 subs and is edging pretty close to the 1000 sub mark. I have an MG Recommends special planned for that milestone where I won't actually be recommending games, but other channels with under 1k subs. Let me know if you know of any great small channels I should consider. Also, a big thank you to my Patreon supporters who have helped me buff my funds a few times this year and supported my rampant Transformers buying habits. I'm sorry I wasted your money on toys, but have you seen Earthrise Skylinks and Generation Select's Megatron? They're beautiful. Anyway, thank you again, do a like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the comments throughout 2020, which will hopefully be a little less shite. Catch you later, folks.